People always say that the dead don't hurt you. It's the living you should fear. I used to believe that too, until I worked at Papash Nagar graveyard. It was 2003, and I was in my early 20s, just trying to scrape by in Karachi. When a friend offered me a job as a graveyard attendant, I jumped at the chance. It wasn't much, just night shifts spent patrolling the grounds and keeping an eye out for vandals. The dead are quiet, I thought. They don't ask for anything. But at Papash Nagar, the quiet was a warning. My first week passed without incident. The graveyard stretched out endlessly, with rows of tightly packed graves and headstones weathered by time. By day, it was a bustling place where families came to pray, mourn, and honor the dead. But by night, it transformed into something else entirely. A shadowy expanse where all the air felt heavier, the silence felt sharper. It was on my 8th night that I noticed something strange. One of the graves, it looked wrong. The dirt had been disturbed, freshly churned, like someone had been digging. At first, I thought it was just animals, but as I got closer, my flashlight caught the edge of the coffin lid. It was splintered and broken. The coffin was empty. I reported it to the head caretaker the next morning. He barely looked up from his tea. "Probably vandals," he said. "Kids just messing around. Don't lose sleep over it." But it wasn't kids. 2 nights later, I found another grave, the soil loose and scattered. This time, the coffin hadn't just broken. It had been pulled halfway out of the ground. The body inside this one was gone too. By now, I was on edge. I started carrying a cricket bat during my patrols, my nerves frayed from the creeping sense that something was just wrong. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, just thieves looking for jewelry or valuables. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. Whoever was doing this wasn't interested in treasure. They were interested in the bodies. I caught him on my 12th night. It was past midnight when I heard it, the unmistakable scrape of a shovel cutting through the dirt. My heart pounded as I turned off my flashlight and followed the sound, keeping low and staying in the shadows. I found him at the far edge of the graveyard. He was working quickly under the cover of darkness. He was a small man, barely more than a shadow himself, but his movements were precise, practiced. He wasn't digging at random. He knew exactly which grave to target. I froze, torn between fear and anger. Then, before I could stop myself, I stepped into the light. "Hey!" I shouted. The man turned, his face illuminated for just a moment. He didn't look startled or afraid. Instead, he looked irritated, like I was the one interrupting him. Without a word, he dropped his shovel and bolted into the shadows. The next morning, I told the head caretaker everything. This time, he took me seriously. Within hours, the police arrived, combing the disturbed graves and questioning the staff. That's when I heard his name for the first time. Mohammed Riaz. Riaz wasn't just any caretaker. He'd been working at Papash Nagar for years, long enough to become a fixture of the graveyard. People trusted him to maintain the graves, to respect the dead. But now, that trust was shattered. When the police brought him in, he confessed almost immediately. Over the past 8 years, he had desecrated the graves of 48 women, exhuming their bodies for reasons he refused to fully explain. Some believed he was driven by perversion, others by compulsion. Riaz himself claimed that he had learned the practice from another caretaker, Wazir, who had died years earlier. But the details of his crimes were even more horrifying than anyone could have imagined. Riaz targeted freshly dug graves where the soil was loose and easy to move. He worked under the cover of night, selecting his victims carefully. When questioned, he claimed that he acted alone, but many in the community weren't convinced. How could he have done this for so long, without anyone noticing? Some whispered that other caretakers must have been involved, turning a blind eye in exchange for bribes. Others believed Riaz was part of something larger, a network trafficking in human remains for black magic rituals or illegal markets. Whatever the truth was, it didn't matter to the families. Their trust in the sanctity of the graveyard was destroyed. For weeks after Riaz's arrest, Papash Nagar was flooded with grieving relatives. They were desperate to ensure their loved ones' graves hadn't been touched. For many, it was too late. I quit the job not long after. I couldn't bring myself to walk those grounds anymore, not after what I'd seen. But sometimes, late at night, I think about what that man did. The way he worked so calmly, like it was just another day at the office. I wonder how many others like him are out there, hiding in plain sight. Because at Papash Nagar, the dead weren't at peace. And maybe they never will be. The story you just heard was based off true events from a chilling case that came out of Karachi, Pakistan. This is the story of the Papash Nagar graveyard, a place meant for peace and eternal rest. But in 2003, it became the site of horrors that shook an entire community to its core. A man, a caretaker by trade, was revealed to have defiled the graves of nearly 48 women over the course of 8 years. What motivated this monstrous behavior, and how did he manage to escape suspicion for so long? Let's uncover the dark secrets buried in Papash Nagar. Imagine this. The Papash Nagar graveyard sits quietly in a bustling Karachi neighborhood. It's meant to be a sacred space where grief and solace coexist. For years, though, something sinister was happening beneath the surface. On October of 2003, gravediggers noticed something strange. Freshly buried graves appeared disturbed. Dirt had been moved, and the coffins had been tampered with. At first, this seemed like petty vandalism, but the truth was far more horrifying. Bodies, specifically those of women, were being unearthed. Some were mutilated, while others were used in unspeakable acts. As the word of the desecration spread, fear gripped the community. Families began to question if their loved ones' graves had been violated. Rumors swirled: black magic, organ theft, or a lone predator. This case was not only grotesque, but also deeply unsettling for a culture that holds immense reverence for the dead. Now this is where we meet Rahman Riaz. At 5 foot 5 inches tall and quiet in demeanor, Riaz worked at Papash Nagar as a caretaker. It was his job to tend to the plants and maintain the graves, work that earned him the trust of the community. But behind this facade was a man responsible for one of the most sickening crimes imaginable. Riaz would later confess to exhuming and desecrating the bodies of 48 women over an 8-year period. He used them for sickening acts, to pleasure his sick desires. He claimed to have acted alone, but the details of his crimes are as disturbing as they are puzzling. How was he able to avoid detection for so long, and what finally brought him to justice? The answer lies in October 2003. According to police reports, a new grave had been dug and a woman's body buried. That night, Riaz entered the grave, as he had done countless times before. But something was different. He later told police that when he saw the face of the woman, he was overcome with fear, claiming her teeth and eyes were horrifying to him. Whether this was guilt manifesting or simply fear being caught is unclear. Riaz stated in an interview that when he saw the woman's face, it propelled him to never do his dirty acts again. Panicked, Riaz fled the graveyard. His hurried movements caught the attention of the other gravediggers, who immediately suspected something was wrong. They chased after him, shouting for help. A mob formed, armed with sticks and stones. When police arrived, they initially thought Riaz was just a petty thief. It wasn't until they began questioning him that the full extent of his crimes became clear. Riaz later admitted to the crimes during his interrogation, shocking the police and the community. He claimed to have learned his behavior from another graveyard worker, Wazir, who had died 2 years earlier. Whether this was true or an attempt to shift blame remains unclear. The investigation revealed that Riaz targeted graves that were freshly dug. where the soil was loose and easy to disturb. These Kacha graves allowed him to work undetected for years. But this raises a troubling question. How was no one aware of what was happening for so long? Authorities admitted that oversight and accountability at the graveyard were minimal. Records were poorly maintained, and there was little to no security. Some have speculated that others within the cemetery may have turned a blind eye or even been complicit in Riaz's actions. But without concrete evidence, those allegations remain unproven. For the families of the victims, this was an unthinkable betrayal. In many cultures, including Pakistan's, burial rituals are sacred. They symbolize respect, closure, and the belief that the dead will rest in peace. Riaz's actions shattered that trust, leaving scars that would linger long after his arrest. So, what motivated Muhammad Riaz? Was it sick perversion, a compulsion he couldn't control? Or was he, as some theories suggest, part of a larger, darker network that is yet to be uncovered? While Riaz claimed he acted alone, the true extent of his crimes and his motivations may never fully be known. What is clear is this: his actions turned the Papash Nagar graveyard into a symbol of fear. Even in death, it seems there was no guarantee of peace. And that concludes this episode of the Papash Nagar case. The Papashnagar case is a stark reminder of how fragile trust can be, even in spaces meant for solace and sanctity. What do you think about this case? Was Riaz truly a lone actor? Or could there be more to the story? If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate the show, and share with a friend. If you want more unsettling stories, for just $5 a month, you can unlock 2 bonus episodes every month and gain access to our back catalog of bonus content. Until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, and remember, sometimes the darkest stories are buried just beneath the surface.